Welcome back to the Detox Docs Report, where we talk gut mold and toxins. My guest today is Kiran Krishnan, a research microbiologist who spent over 20 years studying the microbiome and making this science make sense. He co founded Microbiome Labs, he's run more than 60 human clinical trials, and he's one of the people genuinely moving this field forward. Kiran, I've been looking forward to this. Thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So I'd love to start with your story. What pulled you into microbiome research in the first place?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of genetics and movies. So my if you look at my parents, so my dad was a microelectronics engineer, so he was ahead in his field. He had almost 400 U.S. patents in his name. So he was a very systems thinking kind of guy, inventing things and all that. So he was in that field, and then my mom's a medical doctor, and she's a clinician with the soft sciences and has a very kind of empathetic view in science and medicine. And I think I got like a little bit of both of them, and I've got the love and passion for the biological sciences and the empathetic perspective on that, on helping people through science, but then thinking about the science like a systems engineer, and always looking for the nuance and the innovation in all of this. So I think generally that's how my brain is structured. But then the question is, like, where do you go with that, right? So if I became a conventional doctor like I was thinking about doing, I wouldn't necessarily get to exercise the engineering part of it. Or if I went into physics and engineering, I wouldn't have the biological empathy part of it as much. You could certainly find outlets for those, but it wouldn't be as straightforward. And then the other part of me that is a big driver is I've got a very deep curiosity for frontiers. And so I was always very interested in the world of quantum mechanics. And, if I was better at math, I would probably have gone in that route, but I'm not, I'm not good enough at math to have gone that route. And so, I was watching a movie my freshman year of college. I knew I was going to go into the sciences, and I was pre-med already, by determination. And I was trying to figure out, like, what did I want to do from a major perspective. Everyone kind of goes biology or chemistry or something like that. And then that movie Outbreak, if you remember that, was it with
Yeah.
Morgan Freeman and Dustin Hoffman, right?
Yes.
It was like a Ebola like outbreak in a small town in the U.S. And then it was like all these CDC scientists who were virologists and all that, kind of chasing down this bug and trying to figure out what a cure for it and all that. And I was like, that is exciting. That's what I want to do. I want to figure out pathogens and chase them down and figure out cures for them and all that. So that's what got me into the world of microbiology. So I started studying microbiology, and I stayed with that part of my education. And then what got me into the microbiome side of it is that frontier thinking, because that was a kind of unknown, untapped area in microbiology. In fact, there was actually one kind of key moment that got me much more interested in the microbiome than any other aspect of microbiology. It was I was a number of years ago. This is almost like 20 years ago. I was asked to contribute to an article for U.S. News and World Report on the hygiene hypothesis, right? And one of the questions that was asked of me was, like, how many real pathogens do we have that we have to be really concerned about, on a day-to-day basis? And I was like, I don't know, that's a great question. Let me actually dig into it a little bit. And so I started digging into it to understand, like, of all the microbes we've discovered, viruses, bacteria, fungi, all that stuff, like, what percentage of them are, direct or absolute pathogens, right? That you come in contact with them, they're going to make you sick, and you're in trouble. And what I found was that it's like 0.1%, right? Which means that 99.9% of all microbes we encounter are either benign or beneficial. But even in the world of microbiology, there's so much focus on that 0.1%. All the research work I did in my microbiology training was on pathogens. And that's the track you go, right? Normally, and especially if we go clinical microbiology, you're focusing on the pathogens. So then, of course, my mind goes, what about the 99.9%? Like,
Right.
isn't that the best way to control the 0.1%, letting them flourish? Right. And so then shortly after that, this whole human microbiome project kicked off. And I was like, that's where they're studying the 99.9%, right? That's where I want to focus my time. So very long, probably the longest answer to that question you've ever had, but
No, I
hopefully that
love
provides
that.
context.
I love that. It's so true. It's not just about that 0.1%, it's about the other 99.9% and the terrain, right? And how they're
Yeah.
all interacting. So, in my world, mold and biotoxins, environmental illness, we constantly talk about immune dysregulation. But what I always come back to with my patients is that the gut rules it all. So, Karen, can you help me make that case? Why is the microbiome so central to immune regulation in the first place?
Yeah, the best analogy I always give is think of the immune system as a army that's born with all of the tools. They have all the guns and bombs and tanks and everything that they need to fight a war, but they have no general, they have no information, right? They don't know who the enemy is effectively, right? And they cannot know that, which makes sense because most of their innate knowledge in our cells are coded in our DNA. But you cannot code the environment in your DNA because the environment changes, right? So you're all the way out in Virginia, Virginia Beach, and I'm in Chicago. We have different things that our immune systems have to battle. And so if my immune system was born with a certain limited code as to what the enemy is and who it is and how you go after it, I would be in huge trouble if I just went to the next state. Right. And so
Right.
the immune system is one of the only systems in your body that has to adapt to your environment. Right.
Mm.
And as a result of that, the immune cells are born naive. They have to learn about your environment wherever you go. And they have to do it relatively quickly because if I go on vacation to Asia next week, my immune system has to adapt to that area. Right. And so then the question becomes, well, how do they learn? Right? How do they learn what to attack, what not to attack, what level of seriousness to pay attention to different things? Because there's no forward facing component of the immune system, right? We don't have immune sensing cells on our epidermis to like sense everything that's going on in the air. They use the microbiome as a way of translating environmental information. So the relationship I explained between the immune system and the microbiome is that the microbiome are the eyes and ears of the immune system. They're the neighborhood watch, if you will, for the immune system, right? A great analogy is if you think about the role of the immune system, it's a very, very difficult role. If I were to be a cell in a body, I wouldn't want to be an immune cell, right? It's a massive job. So if you think about one of your sentinel immune cells that are circulating around, so take a macrophage or dendritic cell that has to circulate around and find dangers, right? A lot of the dangers they encounter are going to be microbial dangers, that things that they have to deal with, or toxins, and neutralize them, or microbial byproducts, like in the case of mold toxins, right? So they have to identify all of these things, but they're doing that in a sea of trillions of other microbes and all of their byproducts that they kick out, right? So the analogy there, to really put it in perspective for people to understand what the immune system has to do and why they cannot do it without the microbiome, is imagine there's a stadium and there's a big concert in a stadium, right? So there's 200,000 people in this stadium. And it's a massive, say it's Taylor Swift, because she's the only one that can fill a stadium with 200,000 people. So let's say there's a concert, 200,000 people. You know that there's some intelligence out there that out of that 200,000, there are 5 people that are intending on causing trouble and causing harm, right? So 199,995 are okay, but you've got 5 people. Now they look very similar to everyone else. They all are dressed relatively similar, and they're all humans. And you are the lone security guard How do you find those 5 people, right?
Right.
These numbers are very specific. And the reason those numbers are specific is because it's a 200,000 to 1 ratio of circulating immune cells to microbes in your mucosa and in the body, right? So for every one immune cell that's trying to protect you from microbes and microbial byproducts and all of that stuff, you've got 200,000 microbes, right? So the only way you, as the lone security guard in that stadium, can find the 5 potential people that are trying to cause harm is if the other 99.5% of the people are on your side and are radioed into you. And if they see anything suspicious, they call you and tell you exactly where it is, right? That's the only way, is if everyone else is on your side and working and diligent and looking out for something abnormal. So that's exactly what's happening with your commensal organisms and the immune system. The commensal organisms are everywhere all the time, right? They see everything coming in. They have a certain degree of innate knowledge of what's normal and what's not normal in that environment because microbes adapt much faster than our own cells do, right? Their genetic changes occur much faster than our genetic changes. And as a result of that, they have become the neighborhood watch where they can alert the immune system to anything that looks unusual, right? And a perfect example of that is in COVID, right? We all knew, we started
Yes.
seeing the statistics that certain people had way higher risk of really bad infection or even mortality with COVID, right? So if you took, for example, a 40-year-old with diabetes and a 40-year-old without diabetes, the 40-year-old with diabetes had 10 times higher risk of mortality and morbidity with COVID versus the 40-year-old without it, right? And it wasn't their blood sugar issue or blood sugar management. It actually, as it turns out, was the changes in that 40-year-old with diabetes' microbiome. And this was
Wow. Yeah.
beautifully mapped out by a researcher at University College Cork called Liam Mahoney. What he did was he was able to take hundreds and hundreds of thousands of cases of COVID and then map the microbiomes and associated the microbiome mapping to the outcome that the individual had. And then, as a result of that accuracy, they were then also able to get blind samples of the microbiome of individuals that were exposed to COVID and could predict with a 98% certainty whether that individual got hospitalized or even died from COVID, just from looking at their microbiome, right?
Wow.
They were able to see the pathobiome. So when someone's gut microbiome is dysfunctional, it becomes very easy to see how their immune system loses that communication, right? You don't have all of those people in that stadium talking to you. So if a little virus shows up way over here and your immune cells aren't paying attention to it, it has a much higher chance of proliferating, infecting, causing more damage before the immune system ever notices it, right? Because the commensals around it aren't signaling to the immune system that, hey, there's something happening here. We need you to come here and pay attention to it, right?
Right.
So that's just one layer. What I just talked about is
Mhm.
just one layer of why the microbiome is so important for the immune system. And your immune system would cease to function without the microbiome. And studies have been done on this, where they take no biotic mice. These are mice that are raised without a microbiome. And they have all of their immune components, right? Their T cells and B cells and macrophages and dendritic cells. They have everything, but their and then they inject these mice with a virus, and their immune system literally just sits there and watches, right? It does nothing. It doesn't address the virus at all. And the virus just infects and kills the
Read the
mouse, right?
microbiome.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So I think that's really going to hit home for many, many people in my community who have dysregulated immune systems by biotoxin loads for sure, and how the microbiome is really training that tolerance versus reactivity. And the other piece that's really huge for people is the gut brain axis, and how the stress and the fight or flight that kind of goes with the mold and environmental toxin exposure and just the whole experience of that, and how the gut modulating and sort of biohacking the gut can actually help with that as well. Can you speak to that too?
Yeah, it's actually one of the most powerful tools you can have against anxiety, depression, and cognitive dysfunction. Right. So there was a study called the Netherlands study on anxiety and depression, with a continuous and significant increase in prevalence of anxiety and depression in the first world countries. Some countries with nationalized healthcare systems, they go, let's do a countrywide investigation of what in the world is happening so that we can understand this problem, right? Because of course they're spending a lot of their GDP on managing these issues. And so the country of Netherlands saw this as a big problem. So they initiated a 9-year long study to identify people with anxiety, depression, and then they followed them for 9 years. They did many different interventions and all that. They didn't control the interventions, but then they also looked at all of these biomarkers, and they were looking for the biomarkers that were the most predictive of having anxiety and depression, severity of anxiety and depression, and onset of anxiety and depression. So they looked at all kinds of stuff, right? All these inflammatory markers and all kinds of metabolic markers and so on. The one marker that they found to be the most predictive of the presence of anxiety and depression was something called LPS, lipopolysaccharide, right? Lipopolysaccharide is a component of a gram-negative bacteria, and about, say, half your bacteria in your microbiome are gram-negative. So you've got about half the bacteria in your gut making this LPS compound. So it's generated in your gut all the time. And in your lining of your gut, it's perfectly fine. But if it leaks through and ends up in circulation, it becomes a big problem. So it's a great marker for leaky gut, right? So what the researchers showed over this 9-year study was that as long as people had elevated levels of this LPS in circulation, meaning it's leaking through, then they had anxiety and depression, right? And if they did something, right, they didn't control the interventions, but over that 9-year period, those individuals that saw a decrease in that LPS, their anxiety and depression went away. For those individuals that saw an increase in the LPS, their anxiety and depression got more severe. For those individuals that were kind of baseline, that didn't have too much anxiety and depression, if their LPS went up, their anxiety got really severe. And in fact, they could then use that as a predictive model. They can then predict someone's severity of anxiety and depression and presence of anxiety and depression by just looking at LPS in circulation, right? So this is a core indicator of what's driving your risk of anxiety and depression. The presence of LPS in circulation means you have leaky gut. The clinical term for that is endotoxemia, right? And so the presence of endotoxemia, a leaky gut, means you're going to be much more susceptible to anxiety and depression. We could talk about why LPS creates anxiety and depression. There's a number of mechanisms there, but I think the underlying message is that a dysfunctional gut is the biggest driver of anxiety and depression, right? So somebody's been exposed to loads of toxins and mold, and they've got a dysfunctional gut, and they've probably been doing things to try to cleanse themselves of these issues on their own. They're finding things online, and they're just going through all these random detox protocols and all that. Many of them that can be harsh without working with a clinician. They're probably causing more harm than good on their gut, thereby continuously increasing their leaky gut, and then making them much more susceptible to this anxiety and depression. So they have to fix the lining of the gut. They have to stop that permeability in order to get control of that mood disorder.
Yeah, I love that. Leaky gut is so much more than just zonulin, but also these labs and endotoxemia markers and things like that. Sometimes someone could even look fine on standard labs, just as a reminder for the audience. Functional labs like a gut testing can pick up on these sort of things, but standard labs sometimes will not. But yeah, we talk also about with the endotoxins, there can be that environmental exposure as well from bacteria and the environment and the gram-negative bacteria putting off the endotoxins. But we have to remember that one of those constant sources of potential endotoxemia and LPS is your gut.
Mm-hmm.
It's inherent to the gut. So that just is underscoring the fact that that gut lining in the terrain is so important to heal. And that's why I really do that first, even with clients, before trying to do any kind of detox protocols. We work on stabilizing the gut lining. So, and what are some of the things or compounds or ingredients that are most useful to do that?
Yeah, and it's great that you do that first because, of course, the gut also plays a significant role in the detox process in the body, right? And so, if your gut is really dismantled and you start pushing a lot of detoxification, you can actually create even more issues. And so, stabilizing the gut to a certain degree is a really smart thing to do. For me, I really look at, I boil it down to kind of five pillars, because part of improving the gut, which is a ecosystem, is a number of small decisions that accumulate to drive the ecosystem forward. Right, it's not going to be one or two magical things. It's going to be a number of things that are kind of synergistic that work together to move the ecosystem in the right direction. So when I'm teaching people about this, when it's consumers, I do it as a five pillar systems. When it's clinicians, we get into much more in depth discussions about this. But if we break it down into kind of five pillars of the things that you should be doing, pillar number one is food, right? So food moves the microbiome more so than almost anything. So what you eat really matters. And as much as you can, based on your existing sensitivities and all that, diversify your diet and get as much fiber and polyphenols in your system, right? Fiber is kind of it's getting more popular, thank goodness, but it's a bit of an unsung hero in our world, right? It hasn't been sexy or that exciting to talk about fiber for the most part, right? It's not as sexy as all these amazing peptides and all these space age things that people do, but if I were to tell people that, hey, I have a pill, I invented a pill that if you take it every day cuts your risk of dying from anything by 50%, right? People would jump at the opportunity to buy this pill, right? And it would be $1 trillion product, because what else cuts your risk of dying from any disease by 50% almost? The only thing is fiber, right? So upwards of 1 million subjects, meta-analysis studies as recent as 2021, 2022 has shown that for every 10 grams of fiber you add to your daily diet, you reduce your all-cause mortality that's dying from anything by 10%. And that goes all the way up to almost 40 to 50 grams of fiber, 40 to 50% reduction in all-cause mortality, right? So we have that access. And why is that? I mean, we don't digest the fiber. We don't get any nutrition out of it. It's because it feeds the microbiome, right? And not only does it feed the microbiome and helps the bacteria, the right bacteria proliferate, it creates all of this metabolic byproducts like short chain fatty acids and so on, right? Which are very nourishing, which are very reparative of the lining of the gut of the microbiome. So polyphenols, also very similar. They're also prebiotics. They also feed the microbiome. They also get converted into really important compounds like, say, urolithins, right? That repair your mitochondria and do all these important things. So step one is food. Diversify your diet as much as you can. Add as much as you can fiber slowly and incrementally. You don't want to go from the 8 grams a day that an average American does to 50 tomorrow. You're going to be really pissed off. So you want to go, 5 grams a week. Just keep adding it up. So fiber and polyphenols. The second part of it is stress management, right? So there was a 2015 publication in Frontiers of Immunology that talked about how stress-induced endotoxemia, that is leaky gut that comes about as a result of stress. And I can explain all the mechanisms behind it, but I can tell you with a very high degree of confidence that stress is probably one of the biggest drivers of endotoxemia or leaky gut. And they showed that stress-induced leaky gut was the number one cause of mortality and morbidity worldwide, right? Because here's the tie, right? So stress creates leaky gut and endotoxemia, what we talked about, the LPS, getting into circulation. that LPS getting into circulation is the number one driver of most chronic conditions. So anxiety, depression, Alzheimer's, dementia, cardiovascular disease, diabetes. Even the American Diabetic Association has published that endotoxemia and the leaking in of LPS is what they call the primary insult that starts the process of insulin resistance, right? Cancers, autoimmune conditions. So the vast majority of things that kill us from a disease perspective are enhanced significantly by that endotoxemia. And so managing stress is not just this kind of new age, like, thing that it's a very serious part of any recovery process, right? And then the question may be, how do you manage stress? Well, there's tons of tools out there, and we could have a whole conversation about that. But I'm sure you've addressed that in your podcast many a times. And so diet, stress management. The third one is more about lifestyle components that are critical to a healthy microbiome. So actually exercise and resistance training are both really important. So when I say exercise, I mean getting out there for walks, kind of zone 2 cardiovascular exercise. And then resistance training is also really important because when you lift weights and you contract your muscles, they release chemical compounds called myokines. And these myokines actually have a direct impact on the gut microbiome and the lining of your gut. Right? So when you're stressed, from pillar number 2, one of the really easy things to do is go and start doing burpees. Right? I give people this recommendation all the time, is when you feel that fight or flight coming on, right? If you can, like, let's say you're sitting in a car, so you can't just start doing burpees, start tensing and releasing your muscles. Right? Your larger muscles, your glutes, your quads, even you're just sitting there, like, contract them, hold them, and release them, right? If you're in your office or a place where you can do it, just do a wall sit, right? Till your muscles burn, or do push-ups or burpees. There's a direct connection, number one, because fight or flight is increasing blood perfusion, catecholamines, all of these things to get you to fight or flee. Right? So your body is built up to move at that point, right? And one of the ways to exhaust that is to actually do some sort of movement, right? You're tricking your mind into going, okay, I'm fleeing, I'm fighting, and then now I need to come down from it once you stop the movement, right? So that's an innate programming that gets you to go, because if you just sit there in it, and you just keep freaking out. Exactly. Keep pent up. Your body's going, okay, we're not fighting or fleeing. Like, what's going on, right? Because your body thinks you're in danger. And so if you burn off some of that energy, it actually thinks you ran away from whatever the danger is, and now you're coming down from it, right?
It resolves it. Yeah.
It resolves it. So that's one of the things. And then the other aspect of it is that those muscle contractions release those myokines. And those myokines have a calming effect on your body. Again, that's part of counteracting the fight or flight response, right? So exercise is one of those key components, and then sleep is another key component. Your microbiome works on a diurnal system, meaning it works on a 24-hour clock, just like our body does. And there's a lot of housekeeping work that has to happen at night when you're sleeping to increase the diversity of your microbiome. So if you don't sleep adequately, you're actually shortening that housekeeping time, and you don't get all the repair that's supposed to occur in your gut. Now, that repair also extends beyond your gut. For example, your gut produces something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is really important because that BDNF repairs your brain while you're sleeping, right? Because throughout the day, your brain had a bunch of damage to it from inflammation, from toxicity and all that. Your brain gets repaired overnight through BDNF while you're sleeping so that you wake up the next morning with the same brain that you had the day before. If you don't sleep adequately, you don't get that BDNF upregulation in your gut microbiome, you're going to wake up with a brain that's a little bit more damaged than the day before, right? And you can see quickly how that can accumulate time after time, day after day. So pillar number 3 is the exercise and sleep. Pillar number 4 is what I call exposure. So you want to reduce your exposure to things that harm your microbiome, right? So you think about processed foods, all of the personal care products that are loaded with antimicrobials, over sterilization of your environment, using all this chlorine based cleansers to clean your desk in places like that that don't need to be sterilized. All of that is negative exposure to your microbiome. And then positive exposure to your microbiome is getting outside in nature, getting among people. I'm a big hugger. You want to interact with people. You want to get together in small groups with other people as much as you can, because we're all sharing microbes, and you want to get out in the natural environment as much as you can because we're sharing microbes. And then the last bit is supplementation. And the reason why I put pillar number 5 as supplementation is because you actually cannot out supplement your way of not doing the first 4 pillars. Right? The supplementation is a massive enhancement to the other things you're doing. And so it can really move the needle, but it doesn't move things much if you're not doing this first 4 things. So with supplementation, the spore-based probiotics, the megaspore we were talking about, we've published studies on reducing endotoxemia significantly. I love immunoglobulins, IgG, especially in the detox world, because they bind all kinds of toxins, not only LPS, but they bind mold toxins and environmental toxins and all that, and take the toxigenic load off the system and take it out through defecation. I love prebiotics, oligosaccharide-based prebiotics to feed the keystone bacteria. Lactoferrin is actually a fantastic compound as well, right? Of course, it helps with iron and ferritin and anemia, but also more importantly, lactoferrin is a very important component of your immune system, and actually directly binds LPS in the gut as well. Another unsung hero in this world, and you may be using it in your practice, is yeast beta glucan. And not for the conventional idea of immune stimulation that people think about. Because when you think about yeast beta glucan, you think like, oh, colds and flus, right? I can shorten the duration of my colds and flus. It does that. But that's not the part that's interesting at all to me, because like lots of other things can shorten duration of colds and flus. Yeast beta glucan does one thing that it's the only compound known to do, right? There's no other research on any other compound in the world that does this, right? And it trains the innate immune system. Right? That's a very novel concept. So, okay, it's called trained immunity, right? Now, here's why it's novel for those listening that don't know the separation between the immune system. So you've got the innate immune system, which is the first actors. They act fast, they have non-specific tools, and then you've got the adaptive immune system, which is the memory, the much more precision actors, right? When you get sick and you feel all the inflammation and fever and pains and aches and all that, that's the innate immune system doing its thing, right? And the innate immune system is akin to, like, say there's a bunch of bugs that flew into your room because a window's open and you're trying to kill the bugs. It's like using a blowtorch to kill the bugs, right? You're going to kill the bugs, but you're also burning the wall to a certain degree, right? But that's the innate immune system. They get there fast. They use blowtorches. They just destroy things in a given area. And then the adaptive immune system comes along and goes, hey, what was that thing that causes the problem? Part of the innate immune system presents what it thinks was the problem. The adaptive immune system goes, aha, we know what that is now. We're going to build memory against it. So next time we see it, we can deal with it much faster, right? That's immunity, adaptive immunity that most people kind of understand to a certain degree. What most people don't understand is that the innate immune system can also have memory and can also be trained to respond to things that it has seen before in a much cleaner, faster fashion. Right? And that's actually called trained immunity. And that training actually occurs with the macrophages and dendritic cells within your body. And there's only one compound ever shown to increase trained immunity, and that is yeast beta glucan. Right? So next time the same toxin is encountered, the same virus is encountered and all that, your macrophages and dendritic cells can actually recognize it faster, deal with it faster with less inflammation. Because normally when your macrophages and dendritic cells see something that they think is bad and they deal with it, they also fire up the inflammatory cascades and recruit other innate immune cells to the region, right? Natural killer cells and so on, right? CD8 T cells and so on. And so it creates this big inflammatory response. But a trained immune system gets better at recognizing those problems and dealing with it with less and less damage, right? So yeast beta glucan is a little bit of a secret weapon in immune science and immune biology. So those are kind of the top things that I love. There's probably a lot more that I'm not mentioning, but I think if people even paid attention to those, that's a huge array of tools.
Absolutely. Yeah, so much gold there. So I just want to revisit a couple things, but one is the short chain fatty acids because I have to confess that butyrate of short chain fatty acid is a bit of an obsession for me. In my world, patients have the down gut barrier, the immune system stuck in inflammation, and then we've got butyrate being a fuel for the cells lining the colon, helping to hold the gut barrier tight and also calming the immune system down. So it makes me really curious where you think the science is going as far as from the microbiome expert side. Would there be any future for maybe targeted butyrate producing strains? Because there's only a few that will produce butyrate, or for any combo products or anything that you've been exploring with regard to butyrate?
Yeah, we actually did some work on this, and we published some work when I was at Microbiome Labs on this itself. And I share your obsession with butyrate and short chain fatty acids in general because you know there are three compounds: butyrate, propionate, and acetate, right? And they do so many things; it's mind-boggling. On my skin microbiome side, I've been focusing a lot on acetate because acetate seems to work in the periphery in skin. And actually, I received a U.S. patent on utilizing acetate from the gut to heal acne. And so, so these are powerful compounds. And butyrate, like you said, is critically important for metabolic health. It's critically important for the lining of your gut, the structural elements of the lining of the gut. It's really important for building the mucin layer, which is a very important protective layer of the lining of your gut, and in fact where all the action takes place. That's where most of your microbes live, and you need butyrate to feed the goblet cells that make the mucin. You also, and I'm not sure a lot of people are aware of this, butyrate is also one of the primary fuels for your macrophages and dendritic cells that are circulating around to protect you, right? So with inadequate butyrate, you're actually not fueling these peripheral immune cells. So butyrate is critically important. The thing about butyrate, and I like butyrate supplements, right? So there's a product like tributyrin that I think
Yep.
works well. Um, and it definitely helps when someone's not making enough endogenous butyrate. It can never replace endogenous butyrate, right? And the reason for that is butyrate is made in many different sections of the colon, and in the different sections of the colon, it gets utilized slightly differently. And then also it becomes a precursor to the other two short chain fatty acids, acetate and propionate, which are also important, right? So there's interchange between those short chain fatty acids. So you do want to maximize your endogenous butyrate production. We did a study that we published on the use of the spores in Megaspore with the prebiotic, right? So what we showed is that when you put Megaspore into an average microbiome that's not producing great amounts of butyrate and short chain fatty acids, we can increase the amount of butyrate production by 50%. When we add the prebiotic, it goes to 150%. And so the combination of oligosaccharides in the spores is a massive, stimulation for endogenous butyrate production, right? And so, but then you hear all these people talk about, grass-fed butter and putting it in coffee and things like that, try to get butyrate that way. That's not a great source of butyrate. What you really want to do is get your endogenous butyrate levels up, right? So in that case, the oligosaccharides are a fantastic way to do it. Now, the difference between oligosaccharides and like regular fiber is that oligosaccharides are much more specialized, complex carbohydrate structures that feed very narrow ranges of microbes. And these oligosaccharides like FOS, GOS, XOS feed keystone species, and they feed a lot of the butyrate producers. Versus fiber feeds a lot of different bacteria in your gut, which is important and good. But if you want to get your butyrate up, those oligosaccharides are going to be really important. And then to increase the utilization of the oligosaccharides, add in the spores, and you'll start getting a tremendous amount of endogenous butyrate production. I would also caution people on stool testing for butyrate. Because a lot of times we use that as a measure of like, oh, how much butyrate are they producing? That's proven to be a little bit, disconnected from what's actually happening in the gut, right? I don't know. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always take it in context because many times I'd say the butyrate levels on the gut testing are very low, but I always take it in context of symptoms or even if they're normal, right?
Mhm.
Like what are their symptoms? What exposures do they have? And it always has to be taken in context for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And where this kind of paradox came about is, we know butyrate is metabolically really important, right? So it controls blood sugar, satiety hormones, all of that kind of stuff. So it's quite natural that lean people would be making plenty of butyrate as a key part of how they're staying lean and metabolically healthy, and thereby overweight individuals or obese individuals would be making less butyrate. And we know that to be true when you look at microbiome sampling of lean versus obese individuals. But then when they started studying butyrate in stool, and they found that obese individuals had much higher butyrate in stool than lean individuals, right? And that created a bit of a paradox because it's like, wait a minute, are they producing more? Is that why? Well, actually, so stool is an excretory component, right? So they're excreting more butyrate. Maybe they're not even utilizing as much, right? So that may be why you're seeing more in stool, and they're producing it maybe in different regions of the gut. This is why I talked about all the different parts of the colon being really important. So maybe obese individuals are producing more in the distal colon that's not getting absorbed in the rest of the body, and it's coming out more in stool, right? Because stool is often a sampling what's really happening in the distal colon. So we want to caution about that. And I would just say about butyrate, like there's no reason not to try to push everyone to maximize butyrate production, right? There's no downside to it, right? So even testing it's kind of like, all right, no matter what the test says, let's maximize butyrate. It's one of those things that are
Right.
just really, really good for you overall.
Absolutely. And then, because, there are those producers of butyrate, like the bacteria that actually produce it, but a lot of those are not easy to make shelf stable, right? To actually
Yeah.
have like a butyrate producing probiotic.
Probiotic, yeah, I had one. So I had a strain called Butyriccoccus polycecum. Butyriccoccus polycecum is a butyrate producer that lives in your cecum, and it is one of the highest butyrate producers. It is a strict anaerobe. That's why they're unstable. Most of these butyrate producers, in fact, all of them, are anaerobic bacteria, which means oxygen is toxic to them. So imagine dealing with them in the outside environment, right? Production and encapsulation and all that. They're dying very quickly when they get exposed to oxygen. But we found a way, as one of the last things I was doing at Microbiome Labs, was we had found a anaerobic production system where we could produce these and we could stabilize them and deliver them in capsule form to the large bowel. Unfortunately, at that point, I'd sold the business, and then the new owners decided not to continue with that particular project. That said, I do have the privilege and opportunity of sitting on lots of companies' boards and being and consulted by a lot of companies who are in the microbiome space. I can tell you with great certainty that there are new technologies coming out in the next, say, 10 to 12 months that can take these type of unstable strains and put them in a matrix that perfectly stabilizes them and gets them to engraft. And some of these anaerobes are coming out, and you need a fraction of the dose because these matrices that they're putting them in are much more sophisticated and they stabilize the organism. And so we will have supplemental butyrate producers coming out that will engraft, meaning that they will colonize permanently in your gut, and you can dramatically increase your butyrate production through a probiotic that way. And these probiotics that we're talking about and working on are going to be once a week or once a month probiotics. Like you only take it once a month. You don't have to take it every day because they engraft and they stay for so long. So yes, there's some exciting things coming out on that front.
That is so exciting. I am really glad to hear about that. I'll be looking forward to seeing the latest on that. And for those listening, yeah, so just to underscore, it's not just about, take a probiotic, any probiotic. It's about the resilience of your entire gut on the inside, front, the whole entire tube, and, different pHs in different environments from, mouth on down. And they need different things. And making the gut resilient so that it produces its own butyrate is the ideal. So a lot of times we're dealing with constant influx of toxins and taking supplemental butyrate and everything to combat that, but we want it to be from the gut ideally, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and a little bit of a often overlooked component of all of this is the liver, right? So the liver and the gut kind of go hand in hand. So the liver is a natural part of the digestive system. And there's a significant influence on the microbiome on the liver, especially endotoxemia. So we talked about that LPS that leaks through, right? But 85% of all the LPS that leaks through goes to the liver first. And so the liver has to deal with that massive toxigenic load. The liver has a couple of tricks up its sleeve. It produces something called HDL3. It produces LBP. These are compounds to bind and try to neutralize the LPS, specifically because most of it ends up going to the liver. But as your liver becomes dysfunctional, it can do that less and less, and it can do that without the same intensity. And so then you start getting fatty liver. And this is one of the reasons why, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or as it's now known, metabolic associated fatty liver disease, is so prevalent, right? Somewhere around 65% adults have it. And then steatosis, steatohepatitis, those things are so prevalent now because our livers are undergoing a phenomenal amount of stress from the toxicity that's coming from the gut. Right. And so, you want to think about supporting your liver, but then you also want to think about, your gut to provide your liver with a relief so that your gut doesn't continue to inundate the liver with toxicity, because anytime you're detoxing, you need your liver to do it for you. Right. So that relationship, I think, is not talked about enough out here in our world of health and wellness.
Absolutely, yeah. I definitely appreciate that because, yeah, we talk about liver support because the liver is our master detox organ, but it really all connects back to the gut.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So we talked about some underrated interventions already. Anything else that we haven't addressed that would actually move the needle for people?
On the gut microbiome?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a big thing is mindset, right? So we create our reality quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I see very common in our space as I work with clinicians and their patients, and of course I encounter and engage with lots and lots of people in our, both on social media, conferences and all that. People will often embed their identity with their condition, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's say they've been suffering with SIBO or mast cell or, some condition like that. They're effectively introducing themselves as a mast cell sufferer or a SIBO person, right? That's so ingrained in their identity that it becomes really hard to strip that from your reality. Right? We all know of the placebo effect and the power of that, right? So I've done lots of clinical trials, as you know, and one of the things we're always trying to work around is the power of the placebo effect. If your mind believes something, it's going to change your biology to make that happen. And as a result of that, if your mind believes you are sick and you are a sick person trying to get well all the time, you will remain a sick person, right? And so really you want to try to frame shift as much as you can. And I think there's a couple of things that you would do with that. Number one is divorce the the diagnosis from you, right? From your personality, right? You're not so and so with mast cell activation, right? Syndrome. Just divorce your identity from that, right? That's not your existence. That's not your reality. It's just a temporary thing that you're dealing with. And the second part of it is really around this idea of encountering every decision you make with that identity, right? So, for example, people with mast cell activation, right? If I talk to them about trying something or taking an approach to it, their first response is almost always, I'm really sensitive to everything. So how am I going to react to that? Just the fact that you've said that, you're going to react negatively, right? Exactly. It's going to happen, right? So your body's going to absolutely do that, right? I just had that with somebody I was hanging out with over the weekend. She has mast cell activation, and a little trauma occurred on a part of a body, and then that caused a little bit of nervousness because, oh my God, any sort of trauma will create an activation in my body. And then sure enough, from that nervousness on, it occurred all throughout arms and all that, right? So I know this part is hard, and it takes a lot of mindfulness work, and it takes a lot of work around the trauma that the condition has caused. But that's something really important to pay attention to, right? Your body has an amazing capacity to heal. It has an amazing capacity to drive healing if your brain believes it, right? And that's the part that you really need to get a handle of. All the other things we talked about are important tools that can biochemically, microbiologically move the needle for you. But if your brain doesn't believe it can happen, and that's not you, and that's not you dealing with this for the rest of your life, it becomes really hard to cure or change your condition.
I 100% agree. And I see that with clients. I can tell who is going to heal the quickest because it's the people who say those positive affirmations, who identify with healing and who don't identify as like a moldy or other, identifying like a mast cell sufferer, right? And for those listeners who may see my stories on Instagram and Facebook, is where I put a lot of mindset encouragement. So I would encourage anyone to check those out as well. So thanks for that. That's definitely amazing tips and advice. So this has been wonderful, Kiran. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can the listeners find you and your current work?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, first of all, for having me. It's never lost upon me the opportunity to talk about what I do and share information and knowledge that I have. That's my passion. This information sitting in my head does nothing for anybody, and so it's always a privilege to have an opportunity to share it. So I thank you for that. So people can learn more. So I engage with people a lot on Instagram. My handle is at Kiran Biome, KIRANBIOME. But my new place, the Biome Learning Center. We've got courses for consumers and clinicians on the microbiome. We've got a circle community, which is free to join. And then there's tiers of different things. And we've got lots of practitioners in there and thousands of consumers. And we provide a lot of education and learning material and all that in the Biome Learning Center. So that is Biome LC, BIOMELC.com. So that's another great resource. And we just launched it in February. So come and join us and join that community, and then we'll continue to put out a lot more educational material and all that, so you can empower yourself to understand what the decisions are you need to make day to day, right? Because that's like my whole thing about the microbiome is that, a healthy microbiome comes about from lots of little decisions you're making every day, right? What you eat, what you put on, what you surround yourself with, what you drink, all that stuff. That's the stuff that ultimately cumulatively moves the needle on things. So you need to have a certain baseline level of knowledge and understanding to make those right decisions. And so my goal is to provide people with baseline level understanding about their microbiome and this ecosystem so they understand what the right decisions are.
Amazing. Thanks, Kieran. And thank you for being here on the Detox Stacks Report. I'll see you in the next episode.